Imagine a winter night so silent that even the mountains seem to hold their breath. In the small town of Wintercrest, where the snow falls like whispered secrets, a police officer drives alone through the freezing dark. He thinks the road is empty. He thinks the night is quiet, but then he hears it a soft, trembling howl drifting through the storm like a cry from another world. He follows the sound, and what he finds beneath a fallen pine tree will change his life forever. A wounded German shepherd, fighting to stay alive and searching for something only her heart remembers. Before we begin this journey of courage, hope, and second chances, tell me where you are watching from. I would love to hear your hometown. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be shared, please press subscribe to support the channel so we can bring more winter miracles to you. Wintercrest, Colorado, lay beneath a sky swallowed by winter. A mountain town accustomed to long seasons of snow, yet never fully prepared for nights like this. When the cold felt ancient, when the wind roared like some forgotten beast threading its way through the pines, and when the storm blurred every boundary between earth and heaven, the blizzard falling across the valley was thick enough to erase the horizon, drifting over rooftops and burying the winding mountain pass in white spirals. Wintercrest itself was small, a community of rustic cabins, old timber storefronts, and a single main road that stretched like a quiet artery through the heart of the valley. Against this backdrop of relentless cold drove Officer Ethan Marshall, age 37, the kind of man whose presence carried both steadiness and invisible fractures. Ethan stood a little over 6 feet, broad-shouldered and weather-lined, his dark blonde hair kept short in a style more practical than aesthetic. His hazel eyes, once lively, now reflected a muted resilience, like embers trying to remember the warmth of a fire long extinguished. 2 years earlier, an ice-sheathed ravine and a rescue mission gone wrong had taken the life of his closest partner on the force, and though Ethan never spoke openly of it, Wintercrest whispered quietly about how he had returned from the night changed, quieter, slower to smile, and carrying a grief that had settled in him like permanent winter. Yet, despite the heaviness he bore, he performed his duties with a disciplined loyalty, committed to the safety of the town he had sworn to protect. This night, he was checking the mountain pass for stranded travelers, his patrol SUV moving slowly through sheets of swirling snow, its headlights the only warmth carving a path through the storm. Static hummed through his radio, the storm interfering with the signal, leaving him wrapped in an eerie silence that pressed in from all sides. Ethan had always been comfortable with solitude, but this cold solitude, this version shaped by loss, felt different. Then, just as he rounded a bend where fallen pines leaned under the weight of ice, a sound broke through the howl of the wind. It was faint, stretched, trembling, not the sharp bark of a wolf, nor the threatening snarl of an animal cornered. It was a wounded note, a plea carved straight from desperation, the kind of cry that pulled instinct and memory to the surface all at once. Ethan braked, stepped out into the storm, and raised his flashlight. Snow stung his face and melted instantly on his warm breath, and the beam of light searched through the forest like a trembling hand. The sound came again, fragile yet determined, guiding him toward a fallen pine, whose branches were spread across the ground like shattered limbs. At first, he saw only white, endless snow, ice clinging to bark, wind sculpting ridges along the hillside. Then, beneath a tangle of branches, a small body shifted weakly. Ethan moved. Closer, his boots sinking deep into the drift, and the shape became clear. A German shepherd, female, perhaps 3 or 4 years old, her coat once a rich sable now matted with ice and clumped with snow that clung to her like shards of glass. She was medium-sized, lean, built for endurance rather than bulk, though exhaustion had reduced her frame to something fragile. Her ears drooped, one torn slightly at the tip. Her left foreleg was swollen, bleeding, and scraped raw, consistent with an animal that had freed itself from a metal trap through sheer force of will. Her eyes, though half-lidded, were shockingly expressive, a golden-brown gaze full of pain, but also something more haunting, as if she were still searching desperately for someone not yet found. Ethan knelt beside her, his breath fogging the air as he studied her injuries. He had encountered injured animals before, but something in this dog tugged sharply at the part of him he kept barricaded. Maybe it was the way she tried, even in her weakness, to lift her head. An act of courage he recognized from old memories, the kind that hurt to recall. "Hey there, sweetheart," he murmured, his voice low, steady, instinctively gentle. He reached out a gloved hand, letting her sniff before he touched her. The dog responded by nudging her nose weakly against his wrist, a gesture so small yet so deliberate it tightened something deep inside him. Ethan activated his radio and spoke clearly, despite the static. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12. I've located an injured canine, female German Shepherd, significant trauma to the left foreleg, signs of cold exposure. I'm transporting her to my cabin for emergency care, requesting veterinary standby." The dispatcher confirmed, and Ethan exhaled softly, allowing himself to focus fully on the trembling creature before him. With slow, practiced movements, he brushed snow off her body, checked her for further injuries, then eased his arms beneath her. She was lighter than she should have been, and when he lifted her, she released a tired whimper, followed by a soft nuzzle into the warmth of his jacket, as if she recognized that this human represented safety. The wind roared again, sweeping snow into spirals around them, but strangely, its violence seemed to soften as Ethan stood with the dog cradled against him, the storm's fury shifting into something gentler, almost reverent. Ethan carried her carefully to his SUV, opened the back door, and laid her down on a folded emergency blanket. Her breathing was shallow but rhythmic, her chest rising and falling in fragile determination. He adjusted the heater, removed the ice from her paws, and whispered, "Hang on. You're not alone out here anymore." As he began driving back toward Wintercrest, the storm seemed to loosen its grip on the road. The snowfall, while still heavy, fell in slower, more deliberate flakes, like the sky was easing open a path in acknowledgement of a rescue unfolding. Ethan's cabin sat on a ridge overlooking Wintercrest, a modest wooden home with sturdy log walls and warm amber windows that glowed against the endless white. When he carried the German Shepherd inside, the contrast between the brutal cold outdoors and the gentle firelight within felt almost spiritual. The dog stirred in his arms, her ears twitching faintly as warmth enveloped her. Ethan settled her near the stone fireplace, placing her on a thick wool blanket. The fire crackled, casting hues of gold and orange onto her fur, revealing more details. She had a faint scar near her right shoulder, a healed wound that hinted at a hard life. Her ribs were slightly visible beneath her coat. She had gone without proper food for days, yet her face held softness, a feminine elegance, and a quiet dignity that made her suffering all the more striking. Ethan assessed her condition with steady hands, using the field medical kit issued for wildlife emergencies. He noted dehydration, early-stage hypothermia, and localized infection in her foreleg. As he worked, the dog watched him with half-open eyes, trusting him in a way that startled him. Ethan, who had spent years building walls around himself, felt those walls shift for the first time in a long while. He warmed fluids, prepared temporary bandages, and placed a soft towel beneath her head. After stabilizing her as best he could, he phoned Wintercrest's on-call veterinarian, Dr. Lila Carter. Though she had not yet appeared in this chapter, he mentioned her name with a tone of deep respect. Lila was known across the valley not only for her medical skill, but for her compassion, a woman whose kindness had become a quiet pillar of Wintercrest. As Ethan waited for professional help to arrive, he continued to speak softly to the trembling shepherd, whose eyelids fluttered with exhaustion. "You're safe now," he repeated. "You made it through the storm. I've got you." The dog shifted slightly, then pressed her head, weakly but intentionally, against his leg. He hesitated only a second before stroking her neck gently. "Let's give you a name," he whispered, scanning her warm eyes, now catching the light. "Maple, because your eyes look like autumn leaves." As if approving, Maple exhaled a trembling sigh, and then something subtle happened outside. The storm quieted, the wind eased. Snowflakes began to float downward in slow, delicate spirals, no longer violent, but tender, like blessings drifting from the mountains above. Inside the cabin, Maple's breathing steadied, and Ethan sat beside her, unaware that this moment, the quiet meeting of a wounded dog and a wounded man, was the beginning of a path neither of them had expected, a path carved from winter and fate, softened by an unlikely spark of hope. And as Maple finally fell asleep, resting her tired body, the night outside turned still, as though the world itself had paused to witness a small miracle unfolding beneath the snow. The storm had quieted by the time Ethan finished securing Maple near the fireplace, though the cold still clung to the windows like frost-bitten fingerprints. Inside the cabin, a gentle glow spread across the wooden walls, warming the shadows that had settled in the corners. The German shepherd lay curled on the thick wool blanket Ethan had arranged for her breathing faint but steadier than before. Her fur, now slowly thawing, revealed patterns of deep sable and faded tan, telling the story of a dog who had once been strong, agile, and full of life. The fire popped softly, sending amber sparks upward as though blessing the fragile reunion between warmth and a soul nearly claimed by winter. Ethan moved between tending to Maple and preparing supplies for the veterinarian who would soon arrive. He cleaned around her wound, careful not to cause her more pain, then checked her hydration again. Each small gesture he made was deliberate, shaped by a quiet instinct, a protective edge honed from years of responding to emergencies and nights spent seeing life twist in ways that left no room for hesitation. Maple's eyes followed his movements, half open, dim yet aware, as though recognizing in him a gentleness she had not felt in a long while. The cabin was simple, but carried traces of Ethan's personality: order without rigidity, modesty without neglect. A collection of mountain maps lay on a shelf near the door. A pair of old winter boots sat by the entryway with careful symmetry. A faded photograph of Ethan and his former partner rested on a side table, catching the faint shimmer of the firelight. The photo hinted at who Ethan used to be: someone more open, someone who once laughed freely, someone who had not yet learned the weight of losing a brother in arms. But tonight, some small part of that man stirred again as he watched Maple cling to life with quiet courage. She reminded him of resilience, of survival, of something inside himself he feared he had lost. He stood from his crouched position and listened for movement outside. The storm had softened enough for the veterinarian's truck to navigate the path up the ridge, though he knew the drive wouldn't be easy. He stepped to the window, peering through the frost. Beyond the stretch of trees, a pair of headlights glowed in the distance, growing brighter as they wound their way up the snow-covered road. Moments later, a vehicle door closed outside, followed by footsteps crunching through the fresh layer of snow. Ethan opened the cabin door, letting in a gust of cold air and the sound of boots brushing off ice. Dr. Lila Carter approached the threshold, cheeks flushed from the cold, her dark hair pulled into a neat low ponytail beneath a thick knitted hat. She was 33, of medium height, slender but strong, with a way of carrying herself that balanced firmness and compassion. People in Wintercrest often said she had mountain steadiness in her, quiet, grounded, and shaped by years of witnessing both the tenderness and brutality of nature. Lila's eyes, a clear shade of gray-blue like thawing lake water, immediately scanned Ethan's expression before she stepped inside. "Where is she?" she asked, her voice a warm contrast to the icy wind she brought with her. Ethan gestured toward the fireplace. Lila moved quickly but gracefully, her veterinary bag swinging lightly at her side. She knelt beside Maple and began assessing her with gentle hands, brushing the fur back from the wound, checking her gums, palpating along her ribs. As she worked, she offered calm, clear explanations, not just out of professionalism, but because she understood that even seasoned officers like Ethan needed an anchor in moments like these. "She's dehydrated," Lila said softly, "and she's been exposed to the cold too long. The leg, likely caught in a trap. She must have pulled herself free. That alone tells me she's a fighter." Maple lifted her head faintly at the sound of Lila's voice. Lila paused her examination and smiled gently at the dog, the soft lines around her eyes deepening. "Hey, sweetheart," she whispered. "You did well to make it this far." Lila had always possessed a natural ability to connect with animals, a gift she often credited to her upbringing. Years ago, as a teenager, she lost her family dog during a harsh winter storm. They found him days later, cold, weak, but alive, and the experience shaped her desire to dedicate her life to protecting creatures that depended on human kindness. That memory surfaced each time she encountered a dog like Maple, wounded, lost, and fighting through circumstances far harsher than any living being deserved. With methodical care, she took photos of Maple's injuries, sent a quick report to Wintercrest's animal welfare system, and began preparing supplies. Ethan knelt beside her, offering support where he could, handing her bandages, medications, and warm saline fluids. The fire crackled again, illuminating the focused expressions of both caretaker and officer. "She kept looking at the door," Ethan murmured, watching Maple's eyes shift again toward the entrance. "As if she's expecting someone." Lila nodded slowly. "A mother never stops searching. If she still has the strength to look for something, or someone, that matters to her, it means she hasn't given up hope." Ethan thought about that for a moment. Hope, a word he rarely used anymore. Lila began wrapping Maple's injured foreleg, her fingers steady despite the delicacy of the work. "Her resilience is incredible," she said. "But something's keeping her on edge. Trauma, yes, but also longing." Maple let out a soft, fragile whine, her gaze again lifting to the door. Ethan moved closer, kneeling so she could see him fully. He rested a gentle hand on her neck, feeling her trembling ease just slightly beneath his touch. "You're safe," he whispered, almost as if making a promise to her and to himself. "Whatever happened out there, we'll figure it out." Lila placed a temporary IV line, adjusting Maple's position to encourage circulation. Once the dog settled again, she leaned back on her heels and exhaled. "She'll need monitoring tonight. Fluids, warmth, a proper exam at the clinic tomorrow, but for now, she's stable enough to rest." Ethan nodded, relief loosening the tension in his shoulders. "Thank you for coming out in this weather." Lila glanced at him with a small, knowing smile. "You wouldn't have called unless it mattered." Outside, the storm continued to soften, leaving behind a landscape blanketed in quiet, glowing white. Inside the cabin, Maple's breathing grew more even, the rise and fall of her chest reflecting her body's slow surrender to safety and warmth. The firelight washed over her, revealing a softness in her features that had been buried under fear and exhaustion. She was still alert, still listening for something beyond the cabin walls, but for now, just now, she allowed herself to rest. Ethan remained seated beside her, his hand still on her neck. Lila gathered her supplies but lingered near, studying the scene with thoughtful eyes. She had known Ethan for years, known his solitude, his grief, the parts of him that had hardened and the parts that had quietly remained gentle. And seeing him like this, kneeling beside a wounded creature with more tenderness than he ever admitted to having, told her this moment would change something in him. Lila stood, brushing off her knees. "I'll be back in the morning," she said quietly. "Keep her warm, talk to her. It helps more than people think." Ethan nodded again, his voice soft. "I will." When Lila stepped outside, the cold wind rushed in briefly before the door closed behind her. Maple stirred at the sound, her ears twitching weakly, her gaze lifting once more to the entrance as though searching for a shadow only she could recognize. Ethan leaned closer, his voice low and steady. "Rest, Maple. We'll find what you're looking for." And as the fire glowed brighter and the night settled deeper around the cabin, Maple's eyes drifted shut at last, her trembling easing, her breath settling into the rhythm of someone who, for the first time in far too long, no longer felt alone. Outside, the snowfall softened into a slow, peaceful drift, blanketing the ridge in a gentle hush, as if the storm itself were offering a benediction for the fragile beginnings unfolding within the cabin. Morning arrived in Wintercrest with a brittle stillness, the kind that followed a storm as though the world were catching its breath. Snow blanketed the valley in flawless white, smoothing every rough edge of the mountains until they resembled great sleeping beasts. A pale sun hovered over the ridge, muted and distant, offering only the illusion of warmth. Ethan stepped outside his cabin just long enough to gauge the weather. The air bit sharply at his skin, carrying the crisp smell of pine and the faint echo of shifting snow. Behind him, Maple lay near the fireplace, wrapped in gentle heat and recovering strength she had nearly lost the day before. Though she still trembled faintly, her eyes held more brightness now, a quiet resilience awakening beneath exhaustion. She lifted her head when Ethan returned inside, her ears twitching weakly at the sound of his boots on the wooden floor. Maple's body was lean and still fragile, but her posture shifted with unmistakable intention when Ethan clipped a soft harness around her chest. She stood slowly, balancing on 3 steady legs and 1 injured one, determined in a way that stirred something protective inside him. She wasn't just awake, she was driven. Ethan crouched beside her, his hand resting gently along her neck. "We're only going to look," he murmured, the tone he used for survivors, not for pets. "No pushing yourself too much. Just show me what you need me to see." Maple blinked, golden brown eyes steady, as though she understood more than a dog should. The fire still danced behind her, but she kept glancing toward the door, restless. Whatever she had endured in the forest had left more than physical wounds. There was longing woven into her muscles, urgency laced into every breath, an instinct Ethan recognized because he had once carried it himself after losing his partner. They stepped outside into the morning snow, their boots leaving crisp impressions behind them. The world was quiet, save for the soft crunch beneath Ethan's boots and the faint rustle of wind pushing through iced branches. Maple's paws sank into the cold surface as she took in the air with a deep, searching inhale. The cold didn't bother her. It seemed to sharpen her focus. Ethan checked the coordinates he had recorded the night before, locked his cabin door, and guided Maple toward the vehicle. She jumped into the back with a little assistance, curling into the blanket and lifting her head as though urging him to drive faster. Wintercrest rolled by in muted tones as they made their way up the mountain path. Log cabins with smoke trailing from chimneys, icicles hanging like glass daggers from rooftops, and the modest downtown where early risers shoveled snow from storefront entrances. Ethan had grown used to Wintercrest's rhythms, slower than the cities he'd once known. Steadier, shaped by the winters that bonded the people more tightly than any town meeting could. Yet, today felt different. Today, the town seemed to be watching him, sensing that something small but crucial had shifted in the quiet hours of the storm. When they reached the forest where Maple had been found, Ethan stepped out first to assess the terrain. The snowfall had left a fresh, delicate sheet over the ground, but Maple still pulled forward the moment he opened the SUV door. Her injured leg trembled, yet she pushed through the discomfort with sheer instinct. He clipped the leash securely, checked the knife on his belt, ensuring everything aligned with department procedure, then followed Maple's lead as she stepped into the familiar cold. They walked past the fallen pine where he had discovered her the night before. Maple slowed at the sight, sniffing the broken branches carefully. The smell of pain, fear, and desperation was still there, a memory frozen in the snow. But she didn't linger. She lifted her head, ears pricking forward, and moved deliberately toward a patch of snow farther ahead. The snow there had collapsed slightly, forming small indentations. Ethan crouched down. What he saw told him more than Maple could communicate. Tiny paw prints, no bigger than his thumb. Puppy prints. He felt the air thicken around him. Maple whined softly, her tail low, nose pressed into the snow. She pawed gently at one of the prints, as if trying to uncover the tiny life that had stood there not long ago. Ethan documented everything: photographs, video, GPS coordinates, this time with the precision of a man building a case. Then Maple pulled again, her entire being focused on one direction. Along the trail, a faint smear of frozen blood glistened like a dark ruby trapped beneath the frost. The tracks wove through the trees, small and erratic, suggesting the puppies had been cold, frightened, and unsteady. Ethan felt something inside his chest twist, not pity, but anger tempered by duty. Someone had caused this. Someone had taken these small creatures from their mother and left Maple to fight alone against the storm. Maple pressed forward with surprising force, pulling Ethan deeper into the woods. The trail led them across uneven ground, through clusters of pine trees heavy with snow, and then down a slope that curved toward the outskirts of private land. When they reached the old fence he recognized from past patrol reports, Maple began to shake, not with cold, but with anxiety. The property they stood beside belonged to Rufus Hale. Rufus was a man in his early 50s, unkempt, broad-shouldered, with a reputation that clung to him like the lingering smell of motor oil. He had been fined multiple times for illegal trapping and unlicensed animal pens. Ethan had dealt with him once before, an encounter laced with hostility and defensiveness. Maple stared beyond the fence, ears flattened, tail tucked. Her breathing quickened, and Ethan knelt to steady her. "I know," he whispered, "but we can't go in without cause." He scanned the area. Fresh tire tracks, cut across the snowy ground inside Rufus's land. Under a tarp-covered structure, shapes of old kennels stood like ghosts. And then he heard it, a soft, muffled sound. Not loud, not even clear, just small. A tiny whimper swallowed by distance. Maple cried out, a broken, aching sound filled with fear and yearning. Ethan's jaw tightened. Every instinct in his body urged him to climb the fence, storm through the property, and tear open every structure until he found those missing puppies. But he wasn't that kind of officer, not anymore. Not after losing someone because he once acted too quickly. He couldn't risk Maple or himself or the investigation. Not without a legal reason to be there. Maple pressed her head against the fence, nose twitching as if scenting a memory she refused to lose. She paced, pulling lightly but insistently in the direction of the kennels. Ethan stood, took a long breath, and filmed the scene. Fresh tracks, suspicious structures, sounds from inside, clearly enough to report, but not enough yet to enter. "I promise you," Ethan said quietly, resting a hand on Maple's back, "I'll handle this the right way. I won't let this go." Maple looked up at him, eyes glistening, not in a human way, but with a rawness that pierced him deeper than words. She believed him, and belief came with responsibility he couldn't ignore. They stayed only long enough for Ethan to collect every piece of evidence he legally could. Then he gently tugged Maple back toward the road. She resisted at first, letting out a long, mournful whine, her entire body leaning toward the fence. Ethan swallowed the knot in his throat and whispered, "We're coming back, I swear to you." Eventually, Maple followed, though every few steps she glanced back. Ethan lifted her into the SUV, brushed snow from her fur, and sat for a moment behind the wheel, gathering himself. Maple lowered her head on his knee and let out a soft sigh, a sound of exhaustion, fear, and trust all woven together. He placed his hand on her head. "They're alive," he said softly, "and we're going to find them." But even as he said it, he felt the weight of something darker stirring in the quiet woods behind them, an unseen presence, a danger that hadn't revealed itself yet, but whose shadow had already fallen across Wintercrest. Morning dawned pale and brittle over Wintercrest, the kind of dawn that sharpened every outline of the mountains and glittered on the snow like scattered diamonds. The world outside Ethan's cabin felt deceptively peaceful, but inside him, tension coiled like a drawn bow. After returning from Rufus Hale's property the previous day, he had filed a full incident report, marking the exact coordinates, uploading photographs, attaching audio clips, and submitting a request for a search warrant on grounds of suspected illegal trapping, animal neglect, and potential ongoing harm. Wintercrest was a small town, but its procedures were meticulous. Every warrant required review, signatures, documentation. The bureaucracy was slow, cautious, designed to prevent abuse of power. Ethan understood that better than most. He had once taken action too quickly on a winter assignment years ago. His partner had paid the price. So now he followed every rule, even when urgency pressed against his ribs, even when Maple's trembling form haunted every second of delay. Ethan barely slept that night, sitting near Maple as she lay curled on her blanket. Though she drifted in and out of rest, her ears twitched at every sound, her gaze repeatedly flicking toward the door, as though expecting her puppies to burst through at any moment. Each time she lifted her head, her eyes held a kind of grief that pierced him, a mother's instinct running on pure hope. He whispered to her through the night, steady and gentle, "Tomorrow, I promise." When dawn broke, he was already dressed, his badge clipped to his belt, his boots laced tight, the paperwork for the warrant review completed and submitted. Hours later, just as the sunlight reached the far ridge, dispatch called. The warrant was approved. Ethan didn't allow a single heartbeat to pass before grabbing his gear. He notified Sergeant Willis, arranged for backup, and drove to Wintercrest's clinic to pick up Dr. Lila Carter, who would serve as a medical witness for the animals involved. Lila stood outside the clinic, dressed in winter patrol gear, layered beneath her veterinarian coat, her hair pulled back in a tight braid, strands of dark brown framing her focused expression. She looked smaller than Ethan, but there was nothing fragile about her. She had the calm intensity of someone who had weathered storms, both literal and emotional, and walked out stronger each time. When she climbed into the passenger seat, she asked only one thing. "Is Maple ready for this?" "She's not coming," Ethan replied, his voice firm. "Not until it's safe." Lila nodded. "Then let's bring her children home." As they drove toward Rufus Hale's property, the sky dimmed slightly, though no storm was predicted. It felt as though the mountains themselves were holding their breath. Officer Daniel Reeves met them at the outer boundary. Reeves was in his mid-30s, sturdy, soft-spoken, and one of the few officers Ethan trusted implicitly. Reeves greeted Lila with a polite nod, then turned to Ethan. "You ready?" Ethan tightened his gloves. "Been ready since last night." Together, the three of them approached the fence line. Rufus Hale's property sprawled across several acres of rough, uneven terrain. His house was a weather-beaten structure, patched together with mismatched boards, surrounded by rusted equipment and abandoned tools. A thin wisp of smoke curled from the chimney, proof he was home. Before they could reach the front door, Rufus stumbled out onto the porch, looking half alarmed and half defiant. He was a man in his early 50s with a thick, knotted beard, heavy-set build, and narrow, suspicious eyes. He wore an old jacket coated with grime and snow, and his voice came out rough when he barked, "What do you want now?" Ethan held up the warrant, his expression neutral. "We're here to conduct a lawful inspection of your property. You're required to comply." Rufus's gaze darted to the warrant, then to Reeves, then to Lila. His jaw clenched. "I ain't got nothing here but scrap. You're wasting your time." "If that's true," Ethan said evenly, "this will be quick." Rufus didn't move. For a tense moment, Ethan thought he might resist. But then, through clenched teeth, Rufus stepped aside. "Fine, do what you gotta do." Lila exchanged a glance with Ethan. She knew this man wanted them gone as quickly as possible, which only heightened her suspicion. The officers moved across the yard, boots crunching through the snow. Maple wasn't with them, but her presence was felt with every step Ethan took. He imagined her pacing behind the fence, whining, urging him to hurry. They approached the row of weather-beaten kennels at the edge of the yard. Tarps flapped lightly in the wind, their corners frozen rigid. A faint noise came from beneath the largest tarp, barely audible, but unmistakable. Lila froze. "Did you hear that?" Ethan raised a hand to signal silence. The noise came again. A small, broken whimper. Reeves immediately positioned himself at the door of the kennel, firearm ready if needed, though Ethan knew the threat here was not a violent man, at least not in the conventional sense. What they were dealing with was neglect, cruelty, the kind that hid in the dark. Ethan unlatched the lock. It resisted at first, rusted stiff, then gave way with a rough metallic crack. The moment the door swung open, a gasp escaped Lila's lips. Inside were 3 tiny German shepherd puppies, no older than 5 or 6 weeks. They were frail, ribs faintly visible beneath matted fur, limbs trembling from cold and hunger. Their eyes were wide, unfocused, glassy with exhaustion and fear. The smallest one lay weakly near the corner, barely able to lift its head. Lila immediately knelt and scooped them into her arms, her voice breaking into soft, soothing murmurs. "It's okay, babies. You're safe now." One of the puppies let out a faint cry, a thin, pitiful sound that seemed to echo Maple's voice from the night before. Ethan's throat tightened. Maple had survived only because she refused to give up. These pups had survived because they believed she would come back for them. Reeves stepped back and cuffed Rufus Hale, who had been watching from the porch with growing agitation. "You're under arrest for animal cruelty, illegal trapping, and obstruction of lawful inspection," Reeves said firmly. Rufus sputtered. "They're just animals!" Ethan turned, his voice cold. "They're living beings, and you're done hurting them." Rufus didn't fight. Maybe he knew the law had finally caught up to him. Maybe he knew that this time, the evidence wasn't going anywhere. As Reeves led him toward the patrol car, Ethan returned to Lila's side. She was cradling the puppies against her coat, using her body heat to warm them. Snowflakes drifted down softly, landing on her hair like tiny melting stars. "They're alive," she whispered. "Barely, but alive." Ethan reached down to touch one of the pups gently. Its small body shivered beneath his fingers. "Maple did everything she could," he murmured. "Now it's our turn." And then something happened, small, fragile, yet deeply moving. One of the puppies let out a tiny sound, a soft answering cry, as if calling out to the mother who had braved the storm for them. Ethan closed the kennel door behind them and stepped back as Lila gathered the puppies closer. Snow continued to fall in light, shimmering flakes, casting a soft glow over the moment. In that quiet, silvered yard, surrounded by frozen earth and old wooden fences, the rescue felt almost sacred, like a light piercing through the darkest corner of Wintercrest. Maple's puppies were alive, safe, found. Ethan felt a warmth inside him that the winter cold couldn't touch. They had kept their promise, and soon Maple would know she had not searched in vain. The days following the rescue unfolded gently across Wintercrest, as though the town itself understood the fragility of the new lives that had been placed in its care. The puppies, tiny, trembling bundles of life, remained under Lila's constant supervision at the clinic, receiving warm fluids, nutrient paste, and careful monitoring. Maple stayed with Ethan, and with each passing sunrise, she regained more strength. Her fur began to shine again. The tremor in her step slowly faded, and her eyes, once filled with terror, gradually softened into something calmer, steadier. Ethan visited the clinic every day, sometimes twice, sitting beside the incubator-like enclosure where the puppies slept. They were fragile, still thin, still fighting, but they responded to warmth and attention with earnest, tiny whimpers. Lila often stood close by, her fingers brushing gently over their bellies, her expression equal parts determination and tenderness. The connection between Ethan and Lila deepened in these quiet moments. It wasn't romantic, not in the way movies would describe it, but a soft trust began to form, built from shared purpose, shared nights of exhaustion, and the shared responsibility of giving Maple's little family a second chance at life. Wintercrest Haven, the temporary rehabilitation area in the clinic, glowed warmly each night as snow drifted outside the wide windows. The storm had passed, but winter never truly left Wintercrest. The cold was a constant companion, shaping the lives and routines of everyone who lived in the valley. By the end of the week, Maple was strong enough to walk without limping. She followed Ethan everywhere, through the cabin, to the patrol SUV, even to the yard where the morning frost sparkled like powdered glass. Her posture changed too, shoulders lifted, eyes brighter, energy returning. The fear of loss still lingered in her, but now it mingled with trust, a growing belief that the world might no longer be the cruel, storming place she had survived. One night, after a long shift, Ethan drove home through the winding forest road. Snowflakes drifted lazily across the beams of the headlights, not a storm, just a gentle descent of winter's breath. He felt the familiar tightness in his chest, the heaviness that always came when the day grew quiet and memory had room to whisper. He had lost too much in the snow. He had found too much there as well. When he reached his cabin, he noticed nothing unusual at first. The porch light glowed warmly, and the forest behind the house rustled softly in the wind. But the moment he unlocked the door, Maple's ears snapped upward. She hurried ahead of him, nose twitching, body low and alert. Ethan froze. The air inside was disturbed. Not a mess, not chaos, but wrong. A chair slightly moved, a storage cabinet partially open. Mud tracks near the back door. Someone had been inside. His hand instinctively went to his holster, though he did not draw the weapon. He moved. Through the cabin methodically, Maple closed at his side, sniffing each corner, her fur rising down her spine. The intruder was gone. They hadn't taken valuables. They hadn't tried to hide their presence. They had only searched. For what, Ethan realized with a chilling certainty, was Maple. And her puppies. A cold anger washed over him, not a burst of fury, but a focused, glacial dread. Whoever had done this wasn't Rufus Hale. He was in custody awaiting formal charges. This was someone else. Someone connected to the illegal trapping operations Rufus had supplied. Or perhaps someone higher up. Someone who didn't appreciate losing valuable inventory. Ethan knew Wintercrest's forests were too vast to monitor completely. Illegal bushing, trapping, and wildlife trafficking had haunted the mountains for years. Rufus was just a piece. There were others. And now those others knew Maple was alive. He took photos of the disturbance, called Dispatch, and had Reeves join him to document the break-in. No signs of forced entry, just skill. Someone knew how to move through a locked house without leaving obvious evidence. When the officers left and the cabin grew quiet again, Ethan sat beside Maple on the floor, feeling the weight of responsibility settle deeper into his bones. Maple leaned against him, her ears still twitching nervously. "They were here for you," he said softly, hands stroking the fur along her neck. "They won't get another chance." Over the next several days, Wintercrest police increased patrols around the outer forest. Ethan secured his home with new locks and motion sensors. Maple never left his side. She slept near the door, her instincts heightened, her protective nature awakened. But even in the midst of tension, life continued to grow in small, hopeful ways. The puppies gained weight. Their eyes brightened. They began to yip softly whenever Ethan walked into the clinic. Lila teased him by saying they recognized the boots of the man who promised their mother the world. Ethan pretended to grumble back, but inside, the warmth was unmistakable. Every night at the cabin, the fire crackled gently, and Maple curled near his feet. Her trust in him grew deeper, and Ethan found surprising comfort in her quiet presence. Her steady breathing, her gentle nudges against his hand, the way she watched him with eyes full of unspoken gratitude. Then came a night softer than the others. Snow drifted outside the windows in slow spirals, catching the warm glow from the cabin. Ethan sat on the rug near the fireplace, paperwork scattered beside him, reports about the break-in, surveillance logs, and updates on the trapping ring. Maple limped over with the tiniest hint of tiredness in her healed leg, circled once, then gently lowered herself beside him. Her fur brushed his knee, then her head rested carefully on his leg. Ethan looked down. Maple gazed up with warm, golden eyes, not pleading, not fearful, grateful, trusting, healing. The moment wrapped around them like a soft blanket, quiet and complete. Maple, once trembling beneath a fallen pine, half frozen, broken, now rested safely against him in a cabin warmed by fire and second chances. Ethan exhaled slowly, feeling something inside him finally loosen. "We're going to be okay," he whispered. Outside, snowflakes drifted like blessings from the dark sky, gentle and sure, and inside, man and dog sat together, both changed by what they had survived and both stepping quietly toward whatever waited next in Wintercrest. Wintercrest woke slowly beneath another winter. A year after the night Ethan had first found Maple in the snow. The seasons had come and gone, but winter always returned to the valley with a soft, familiar power, wrapping the mountains in white, settling quietly atop the evergreens, and drawing long shadows across the wooden cabins that dotted the ridge. Yet, this winter did not feel like the one before. Something had shifted in the town, in its people, in its heartbeat. Ethan felt it each morning when he stepped outside his cabin and breathed in the crisp mountain air, Maple padding faithfully at his side. The past year had reshaped both of them, binding their lives to a mission greater than anything they had anticipated. After the investigation that followed Rufus Hale's arrest, Wintercrest confronted a truth it had ignored for too long, that the forests surrounding the town had become a silent battleground for illegal trappers, poachers, and opportunistic individuals who preyed on wildlife. But from that discomfort grew something hopeful, a community movement. People began attending town meetings, writing letters, donating supplies. The momentum that started with Maple's rescue evolved into a formal proposal spearheaded by Lila and quietly championed by Ethan. By early autumn, the town council approved the construction of Wintercrest Haven, the first dedicated animal rescue and rehabilitation center in the region. Nestled at the foot of the eastern ridge, the center was a warm, sprawling timber building with wide glass windows, heated kennels, examining rooms, a therapy wing, and an outdoor running trail that cut through the pines. It became a sanctuary for animals recovering from hardship. Foxes with injured paws, owls caught in fences, stray dogs, abandoned cats, and wildlife impacted by traps. Ethan was appointed head of the Haven's Search and Rescue Division, a role that blended his law enforcement background with the protective instinct he had rekindled since finding Maple. His days were filled with patrol calls, rescue missions, training volunteers, and coordinating recovery plans with local rangers. Lila, with her calm authority and gentle presence, became the center's medical director. She oversaw the care of every animal that came through their doors, teaching young interns how to treat and rehabilitate wounded wildlife, instilling in them the same compassion that had guided her hands the night she treated Maple by the fire. As for Maple, winter had transformed her. The once wounded mother whose fur was matted with ice and fear now walked with her head high, confident, gentle, and purposeful. After healing physically, Maple displayed a remarkable instinct for comforting others. She would lie beside frightened dogs during treatment, stand quietly near injured fawns, or rest her head on the knee of a grieving visitor who had come seeking solace. People noticed, some cried, some laughed softly in disbelief, and so Maple became the Haven's first certified therapy dog. Her presence eased panic, soothed sorrow, and inspired resilience in ways no training manual could teach. Children loved her. Elderly residents trusted her. Even hardened officers found themselves kneeling to stroke her fur after long, draining days. She was, in every sense, a miracle carved from the winter, and her puppies, now nearly a year old, had grown into their own roles within the wider world. The smallest one, the pup who had once lain motionless in Lila's arms, became a therapy companion for children with autism in a nearby center. His calm demeanor and patient nature mirrored Maple's, helping children communicate, laugh, and feel safe. The largest pup, energetic and fearless, was selected for specialized search and rescue training with the state's mountain operations team. He excelled, especially in snow terrain, as though the winter itself had become his familiar partner. The third pup remained at Wintercrest Haven, working alongside therapists to help rehabilitate other animals. He had Maple's eyes and Ethan's stubbornness, refusing to leave the side of any animal too weak to stand on its own. Ethan often joked that he was the center's assistant guardian, a title the entire staff adopted with affection. Watching them grow filled Ethan with a pride he hadn't expected. Every step the pups took echoed Maple's survival, and every success they achieved reminded him that the world, despite its cruelty, held remarkable beauty. On the first morning of the new year, snow began to fall again, soft, slow, unhurried. Wintercrest Haven glowed warmly from its timber walls, windows lit with golden light as if carrying the quiet heartbeat of every creature inside. Ethan arrived early, Maple trotting beside him with an alertness made sharper by the cold morning air. He unlocked the main outdoor gate and stepped into the therapy yard, where fresh snow lay untouched like a perfect canvas. Lila joined him moments later, bundled in a deep forest green coat trimmed with faux fur, her cheeks flushed pink from the cold. Her hair, normally in a braid, was loose today, softened by the winter air. She gave Ethan a small smile, calm, warm, unspoken. They didn't need many words these days. Their partnership had grown in quiet, steady ways through long nights of rescue calls, shared laughter over burned coffee, and the kind of understanding that only forms when people walk through hardship together. "Ready?" Ethan asked. Lila nodded, pulling on her gloves. "Let's give them a morning to remember." Ethan opened the kennel door. Maple trotted out first, her paws sinking into the powdery snow with graceful ease. Behind her bounded the three pups. Larger now, nearly full-grown, their coats thick and vibrant. They burst forward with unabashed joy, scattering snow into the air as they ran. Maple watched them for a moment, motherly pride softening her posture. Then she chased. After them, leaping through the snow in spirals of playful energy Ethan had never seen from her in the early months of her recovery. The cold air rang with joyful barks, light and bright like bells. Ethan stood beside Lila, their shoulders brushing lightly. She didn't pull away. He didn't either. They watched the dogs race across the field, 4 arcs of motion carving crescent-shaped trails in the untouched snow. Maple eventually climbed onto a small rise near the fence line, chest lifted, tail high, breath visible in soft white clouds. She looked majestic there, framed by the pale glow of morning. Ethan and Lila walked to meet her, footsteps soft on the snow. As they approached, Maple turned her head. Her eyes, warm, golden, steady, met Ethan's, then Lila's. Something moved in those eyes, peace, belonging, a quiet declaration. "We're home." She didn't speak, of course. She didn't need to. Maple stepped forward, pressing her head into Ethan's hand. Lila's gloved fingers rested lightly on Maple's shoulder. Snow fell gently around them, drifting like tender blessings, settling over Wintercrest Haven, with the serenity of a prayer whispered into the cold. And there, on that small snowy rise, man, woman, and dog stood together, not as survivors, but as souls who had learned that even the harshest winters could become the cradle of miracles. In the quiet closing of this winter journey, we are reminded that the miracles of God do not always arrive with thunder or bright signs. Sometimes they come through a loyal dog who refuses to give up. Sometimes they come through the courage of a man who chooses kindness when the world feels cold. And sometimes they come through the gentle strength God places in ordinary hearts like yours and mine, the strength to hope, to care, and to keep going, even when life feels heavy. In our everyday moments, we each face our own winter's times of fear, doubt, or loneliness. But God walks beside us even then, guiding our steps, sending us comfort in unexpected ways, and reminding us that no one is ever truly alone. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who may need hope today, and leave a comment to tell us your thoughts. Type Amen if you believe that God still sends quiet miracles into our lives. May God bless you and your loved ones with peace, protection, and strength in every season. And please press subscribe to support the channel so we can continue bringing stories of faith, kindness, and redemption to many hearts.